Well, what's interesting is we find that people in both Europe and the United States blame Russia primarily for the violence. It is interesting that 44% of the French and 34% of the Germans blame somebody in Ukraine for the violence, either the separatists or the Ukrainian government. And 12% of Germans, the largest in our survey, said, well, actually, they blamed European governments for it, the Western governments for it. So it's a very interesting survey. On one hand, we thought that we expected people to say that they blamed Russia, but the other people they blamed was also an interesting finding.
Do you feel, therefore, that a blame game is being carried out? I mean, surely in a situation such as this, people, entities, organisations are bound to be blamed. How can we avoid this?
Well, I do think that what's interesting is that it suggests why some Western European countries, the populations in those countries, are reluctant to send arms to the Ukrainians, are reluctant to consider military force in response to Russian aggression, because they aren't completely convinced that Russia is to blame here. Now, again, the plurality in all of these countries say it's Russia's fault. But it's the minority who says that we blame somebody else that I think helps inform why people may be reluctant to arm the Ukrainians or to necessarily be as worried about Russian aggression as some others might be.
But surely it's the Ukrainians, no matter who is guilty, no matter who is innocent, it's the Ukrainians that are suffering. Therefore, is not blame or lack of blame getting in the way of that?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think that there's certainly more unanimity in the United States about what happened, especially on the right in the United States. But I think it's useful for Americans to realize that Europeans see this differently. It's not that they totally disagree with the interpretation of who's to blame, but they certainly have a more nuanced view. And as you say, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the Ukrainians who are suffering, and the Ukrainians are very clear about their suffering in our survey. And they certainly blame the Russians. But it is also clear that the West is divided as to what it wants to do about this. They're willing to give economic aid, not willing to give arms, willing to offer NATO membership, interestingly, but not as willing to give EU membership.